nem vai sair aqui outra. We hope it wasn't ready. dritten Platz in dieser Pro-Weltcup-Wertung. Damit die 88 Meisterschaftspunkte nicht in der Erwartung an der Spitze des Transports. Einer kommt jetzt noch in die Box hinein, war dann vielleicht das Fahrzeug aus Ausschlaggebend hat gegeben. Diese Rotphase 28 sind die gesagt worden, hier das Motorsport der Straße, der gestern auch die
Free practice midway through pretty much here at the Nurburgring in what's the final round of this year's Blancpain Endurance Series, and an amazing year it has been. One class, the Pro-Am category, already decided about the AMs and the Pro Cup to be slugged out this weekend. This is the car, number 2 Audi of Frank Stippler and Stefan Ortelli, that leads the Pro Cup in the standings, but there are a whole host of other drivers, some actually not here, that could have a chance of winning it. Of those that are here, it's going to be battled out between 6 different teams. So it's wide open, and you never know what the Nürburgring weather has in store as well, just to spice things up tomorrow either. Frank Stippler's at the wheel of the car at the moment. This free practice session runs as normal for 90 minutes. We've got about 54, so we're still approaching halfway, but not by much. We've had a red flag as well, a car off the road that interrupted proceedings. The good news for the teams, though, is that it was a fairly brief stoppage, and also the road is dry, so they're learning proper data out of all of this. The forecast for tomorrow, depending on who you talk to, is either glorious sunshine or heavy rain, but it might be a combination of everything day in the Nürburgring. And with qualifying at 8:30 in the morning, that could be a real test of drivers as well. Stefan Ortelli in the pit box looks on. The car that he's responsible for, Frank Stippler drives at the moment, 19th fastest. But what do you read into a free practice session? Relatively little, because the drivers and the team still working through a programme. In some cases they'll be on old rubber as well, keeping the new tyres for qualifying to come later on in the weekend tomorrow morning. But that actually might be folly, because if it's a damp circuit, then they're not going to be able to use them at all, so they then end up with a fresher set for the race. In every class, in every round, we've had different winners. Nobody in the championship this year has won twice, so it illustrates just how open it has been. Duncan Cameron and Matt Griffin, the Pro-Am champions already, because of scoring so well at Spa, where you get points at the 6-hour and at the 12-hour mark, as well as at the end of the race, and so they were able to mop that up there. But the other classes, as I say, still to be fought out over the course of this weekend. Now, the Pro category is undoubtedly where all the attention is going to be. Frank Stippler and Stefan Ortelli with the advantage, with 7 points over the absent Marcus Paltela and Lucas Lohr, Spa winners. Then you've got Steph Dusseldorp, who is 3rd in the points, with Nico Bastien ahead of Katsuma Sachio, Wolfgang Wright, Alex Buncombe. The Nissan drivers are here. So 6th, Danny Jonkadea could be a winner. Guy Smith, Andy Merrick, Stephen Kane are in touch. Nico Muller could be, but he's absent. And that then takes you all the way down to Jean-Carl Vernet, Robin Frins and Laurence Vantour in the number 1 Audi that currently is 9th fastest. Now, as the session unwinds, the fastest car for the moment is the 75 Audi, Philippe Salaquada at the wheel. Just had a look at the Black Falcon Mercedes, which is the Hubert Haupt car. That running strongly at the moment. There it is. In fact, it's 4th in its class. And it's got Abdulaziz Al Faisal at the wheel just for this part of the session, for these laps. Now, in terms of lap times, we've got a 1:56 as the best, which is by Salaquada in the ISR Audi. And 55 cars anticipated to take the start this weekend. It's another mighty grid. There's the 21, Abdulaziz Al Faisal, among others Gary Kondakov as part of the driving force. And we've actually, having said that we've got 55 cars, had 2 that have not yet ventured out, but we're not far off, I think, getting the last couple onto the track, one of which is one of the ACA ASP Ferraris, number 10. Of Maurice Ricci, that has not yet gone out. And 18 Mercedes missing. Now, that's a car that Sean Johnston put into the gravel in the bronze test, so that's not yet been out. 51 Ferrari, looking quick as ever it does in Pro-Am. It is the championship winning car there of Duncan Cameron and Matt Griffin. And at the moment, 3rd overall it is, and it's got Duncan Cameron behind the wheel. So the Lumirank display in the windscreen at the moment shows the overall position. And heading downhill is Ferrari 51, part of the fleet that AF Corsa runs. Now, this session not all about lap times, although we have just had an improvement for number 7 Bentley of Stephen Kane, up to 9th fastest. Stephen Kane has gone, as Duncan Cameron works his way then up out of the Dunlop curve, back onto the power, climbing uphill through the Schumacher S. Speed building all the time, and then you've got the Bilstein curve at the next right-hander. Out of the S that he comes, and Duncan Cameron with pretty much the road to himself, looking reasonably good for a time, although the first sector just a little bit down on what he has done previously. Another car that's going strongly this morning, Lee Mole in the 888 BMW. He's 8th fastest. But across the times, there's a real spread of drivers from different classes, and inevitably in free practice for Blancpain, drivers and team managers being invited to go and see the race director for earlier infringements, but no such dramas for the multicoloured 51 Ferrari. So down through the start and finish area goes Duncan Cameron. Third fastest here. That lap was a gentle one, in fairness, a 59.932 as against the best, which might have been a Matt Griffin time potentially from earlier, 156.682. Through the Mercedes arena goes the Ferrari. Remember here last year we had the 6-hour race. This year it is 3 hours, back to the conventional format, which means fewer points on offer for those that want to try and win a championship. So they have got to drag good results out of the cars, but with fewer points on offer. 888, the 888 BMW, Lee Mole at the wheel of it, co-owner of the team, along with the redoubtable Ian Harrison, a team with a great pedigree in touring car racing, and now the GT side, overseen by Keith Cheetham, looking good in GT racing as well, one of a number of teams to have battled to glory within the British GT Championship this year. And Lee Mole, former Ginetta racer, great enthusiast for his racing, successful businessman, bought into 888, and he's championing the GT side of it. Ryan Ratcliffe and Joe Osborne are the other two drivers. We know that Joe Osborne will fly in that car. Ryan Ratcliffe gets better all the time as well. So within Pro-Am, the category in which this car is entered, that's going to be another one to watch, I suspect. We've got a yellow in Sector 1 at the moment, and that's the reason why, because there's been a spin for the 0 BMW. And that had at the wheel of it Felipe Fraga. So Fraga has had a rotation, he's back on track. So BMW is taking up attention at the moment, one of which, of course, is this car, 8th overall. And then you've got Fraga's spin. He's 32nd currently after his problems. One or two others much further down the order than anticipated thus far, but as the session cycles through, then you're going to find the drivers working their way into contention. The championship situation also, just to make the point, peppered up a little bit because of the fact that the Andrew Palmer, Jeroen Mul, Fabio Babini Lamborghini from Monza, excluded after winning on the road, has been put back into the results. So it went to an appeal. The appeal was thrown out. It went to another appeal. That was upheld. And so the Lamborghini is victorious at Monza. It's a shame that the story kind of got lost in all the protests and appeals, because there was that element to it. There was also the fact that briefly we had a Pro-Am car winning outright, but that now hasn't happened because the Lamborghini from the Pro Cup put back into the classification. Joe Osborne in relaxed mood in the pit lane, as there is the Lamborghini, or one of the two Lamborghini Huracans. And Barwell Motorsport, that you'll see on the grid in this championship running the Curiacos BMWs, has already signed up to be the British team to run the Huracans next year within British GT, but there's also a European programme that it's pledged, and hopefully that will be the Blancpain Endurance Series as well, and that squad, operated by Mark Lemmer, may well hit the tracks in this as well. How that's going to affect Curiacos and the partnership remains to be seen, but could be that the Curiacos livery adorns Lamborghinis. Now 75 has had a change of driver while it's been sitting in the pit lane, because now Marco Bononomi has taken that car over. This is an Audi that's not really delivered this year. The Czech ISR team has made progress, and Audi clearly supporting it because they put a factory driver in Bononomi into the car, but it's not quite gelled, but it's looking pretty impressive this morning. The team started the year with two. One was quite badly crumpled at Monza, but only one car for the remainder of the season. There's been another Ferrari off the road there. Which one was that? That's scampering back onto the circuit. 16 by the look of it, which is the Anthony Pons Fabian Barthez car. It is tempting to suggest that that was Barthez at the wheel of it. And it was Fabian Barthez who's scored an own goal, but he's back on track. Outside the top 40 at the moment. That car is to be found quite a long way down the order. 48th at the moment. 46th is where you find the Mercedes there, which has got Miguel Torrell at the wheel of it. Part of the Rover Racing assault for the weekend. Different colour scheme. And Rover, a team that always goes well around the Nurburgring, so don't discount it. Rover trying to secure the team's championship. There's that element up for grabs this weekend as well. So chopping and changing drivers across the two cars. 98 is here for points, whereas 99 is the one that has a chance of winning the Pro Cup for the drivers overall, thanks to Steph Dusseldorp and Nico Bastien, who come here for the purposes of the weekend 8 points back on the championship leaders, so they're very much in touch. It's going to be fascinating to see how the race pans out, because we know that lots happens in a 3-hour Blancpain race, but you've also got to juggle that and at the same time bear in mind the championship machinations. So there's the race to get excited about, there's the championship, which will change, I would have thought, almost lap by lap, depending on who's behind the wheel of a given car. Now, 98 Mercedes then is a long way back, but making progress. The road, surprisingly, is clear for him at the moment. The pit lane is not that busy, but it's the full Grand Prix circuit that is in use this weekend here at the Nurburgring, so there's lots and lots of space for the drivers. It's not like the short version with the cut-through hairpin that, for example, the DTM uses, where traffic becomes a big issue. There's a lot more space for these cars this weekend, with the run all the way down to the Dunlop curve at the bottom of the hill. Over 5 kilometres long, therefore, the circuit. As up towards the end of the lap comes 98, so this should be a pretty decent lap by Miguel Toril. Former single-seater driver heads over the timing line, and to where does that improve him? Let's see, 46th, so not a massive improvement, unfortunately. Still, the top time is claimed by the Bononomi Audi. Number 7, Bentley, has got Stephen Kane at the wheel of it. Now, this is another car that could win the championship in the Pro Cup. Remember last year, Bentley came onto the scene at Monza and then won the next 2 races, back-to-back victories at Silverstone and at Paul Ricard. Haven't had a Bentley win all year, but by point scoring, they're still in touch. Could have been even better, but for the car's retirement, for example, from the Spa 24 hours, bit of damage in the early hours of the morning, putting the car out of the race. Stephen Kane not at the wheel then. Andy Merrick was the man behind the wheel and got caught up with traffic, but the Bentley is still strong, and the team very conscious that it hasn't had a victory this year, the M Sport cars, and you'll see in due course the second works car has changed its number. They normally run 7 and 8, they're 7 and 31 this weekend. Why have they changed one of them to number 31? Well, it's to try and bring some good luck, because 31 is a number that Bentley carried in 1929 to win the 500-mile race at Brooklands with a 4.5-litre Bentley, and so they're trying to see whether the gods will smile on them by using the same number. So 31 is the car of Max Boot, Maxim Soule and Andy Soucek. And this is the sister car, number 7. Stephen Kane at the wheel of it, through the Mercedes arena then. The next sequence, very hard to find an apex for, because it's either a long looping left or 2 bolted together in quick succession. This is a pinch point. Quite often you'll find people lunge up the inside, and if the move doesn't work, they then get themselves on the outside for this part of the circuit, out of the Mercedes arena, run a little bit wide over the curb, speed building. To the right is the cut through for the hairpin there, but we go on, we go left through the next S's, plunge downhill. Big gravel bed on the left-hand side, arms outstretched to catch out the unwary, and then the speed builds as they plunge downhill to the very bottom to the Dunlop curve. Past the Kaspersky Ferrari goes Stephen Kane, hard on the brakes then, tightens it into the apex, gently back on the power now, floors it, the long drag uphill, road climbing all the while into the Schumacher S, which is more of a flick, and you can use the curb on exit as well compared to the next S, which is the Bilstein curve, because there is some braking. You've got to drop it down a gear into the left, use the curb on the inside, burst of acceleration, set it up for the second part, run it up wide onto the curb, and now speed builds all the while up towards the end of the lap through the Ad Van Bogen, which is the right-hand kink. And then the Bentley, number 7 of Stephen Kane, which in the sectors has gone strongly. It's the fastest in the session now after its previous lap that we were riding with at the start. Comes through the motorbike version of the chicane, the slightly softer chicane, which therefore has less chance of people driving into each other, and up towards the end of the lap. So in the sectors, Stephen Kane's been a fraction down on his previous lap, but it's still the quickest car by 0.6 of a second. He comes across the timing line. That was a 56.048, 0.3 down on his earlier best, but Bentley number 7 is the fastest in the session thus far. Guy Smith nearest the camera smiles in approval. Andy Merrick is the man with the crash helmet on, getting ready for his turn behind the wheel. And in the meantime then, Stephen Kane did an absolute best in the last sector of that previous lap. Trouble is now, though, I fear he's going to come across traffic. 40 more minutes of the session remain. You can see somebody vigorously flashing the headlights there. It's another of the Bentleys, in fact. It's the HTP car, 84. HTP's pretty busy this weekend, because not only has it got a car to run here, it's got another car to run at a different circuit. It's the penultimate weekend of the German Championship that runs at, naturally, a Dutch circuit. So they've split themselves across different lands, different championships. Back into the session in the background there came the Team Russia at Kyriakos, Barwell, BMW. And there is 35 Audi, which runs in Pro Cup. Christopher Mies, former Blancpain Endurance Series champion, winner this year of the 24 Hours on the Nordschleife. Miguel Molina, set to make his GT debut, the Audi DTM racer. And Greg Gilbert, the French team's regular pilote. They are the three drivers. And Miguel Molina is given driving duties, set for a busy time. He'll be back a week's time, because it is the DTM penultimate weekend here, but on the short circuit next week. But Miguel Molina, who is following, if you like, in the footsteps of his Audi DTM teammate Eduardo Mortara by having driven in this championship in this car. He takes it over for this weekend. Interesting that Audi now deciding to bring more people from the DTM and give them some GT experience. Maybe this is where they feel they ought to be. Molina has not yet had a DTM win, but has been a regular point scorer for the brand, but has not yet really been given the support perhaps to win the championship. But in a GT car, working his way with the sister car up towards the S's there, makes his way through on the inside of Gilles Lallemand in the second of the Santilot cars. Backing on the side from Boris de Richebourg's company. Boris, who was a mainstay of FIA GT racing in the late 1990s, early noughties, but with, at the moment, behind the wheel of the car there, Miguel Molina. See how he gets on. 17 fastest, but the sector's not looking too flash. We have had an improved time from 44 Aston Martin, which has got the ever-spectacular Stefan Mücker behind the wheel. So let's just see whether this is going to be an improvement for Molina. I don't think it is, in fairness. He's down in the two sectors thus far on the lap, so the 35 Audi heads up towards the timing line now, and 17th it was at the beginning of the lap, and at the end of the lap, 17th is where it stays. Stefan Mücker in the Oman Racing Team Aston Martin, powering his way downhill then, and Stefan Mücker, pole position for the Spa 24 Hours last year, 2 years ago. Now switching from the Beechdean Aston that he's raced in Blancpain to this car, run by David Barsham's Motorbase squad. And it's going to be a very competitive car, this, I would have thought, because not only does it have Stefan Mücker at the wheel of it, but also Rory Butcher, who has been one of the young guns in British GT this year, having moved from the Carrera Cup, and Ahmad Al-Hafi, who remains the man that brings the Oman backing and licence to the team. And Ahmad Al-Hafi himself has got better and better and better. Regular co-driver Johnny Adam has been swiped away by Aston Martin to go and race in America this weekend in the WEC round, but Stefan Mücker certainly equal to the task, and at the moment the car looking very competitive indeed. Fifth fastest it is, 1:56.803 is the best lap time. The fastest car in the session had been, remember, the ISR Audi, but the team manager of that car is now being summoned to the race director. 44 in the meantime. Stefan Mücker heading up towards the timing line. Is he going to improve? No, I don't think he is. The two sectors that he's done are down. And as he comes across the timing line now, that lap will be still fifth fastest. So the one car that has not ventured out in the session is the Maurice Ricci Ferrari number 10 from the ACA ASP Autosport Promotion team that had strife in the bronze test. Didn't look, I have to confess, when I saw it, that it had any damage, but it might be mechanical dramas, and that's kept it out of this session as well. So a huge chunk of track time being missed by the car. The fastest of the AMs at the moment, incidentally, is 34, which is the Pierre Eret Alexander Maxwell Mercedes. As we're looking at number 2, which is still Frank Stipper at the wheel, 9th fastest. Behind is the 32 Aston Martin, the Michael Meadows, Paul Wilson, Stuart Meadows car, which has got Stuart Leonard at the wheel of it. There is Frank Stippler then heading downhill. It's still Andy Merrick's Bentley at the top of the times. He has not done the time, but he is now behind the wheel of it. Stephen Kane having done the work earlier. So that's what they have to try and aim for, a 1:55.701. The other Bentley, number 31, Andy Soucek at the wheel of it, is now 8th, 1:57.032. So approaching the final third of the session, not all about time, it's about setup, about, in some cases, learning the circuit. Frank Stippler certainly doesn't need to learn this place. Done many a mile around here, and the Nordschleifer, and very nearly comes a cropper, because number 6 Audi very nearly turned into him there, which is Marchi Lee at the wheel, the Hong Kong driver, very nearly clattering into the side of Frank Stippler, and that's the last thing you're going to need at any point in the weekend, but certainly when you're trying to get the car dialed in for pre-qualifying later on. Rear wing shimmying under braking as Marchi Lee a long way down the order. Number 6 Audi, 35th fastest he is for the Phoenix Racing Team. Base just over the road. You come out of the circuit, turn left, and you virtually fall over Ernst Moser's factory. 63 looking quick as well. The glorious sounding Lamborghini Huracan. It's the quicker of the two, and it is Mirko Bortolotti now who is behind the wheel of that car, third fastest, 156.622. We've had an improvement in sectors on his in-lap from Stefan Mucker, and slowing right down is Bortolotti. I suspect that's to try and buy clear track space rather than with a problem. And stopping is number 1, Robin Frins. Now, why has he come to a stop, and where has he come to a stop? It looks like it's in the Mercedes arena. And we've got a very slow 0 BMW over the line. We've got a full course yellow. That's why they're going slowly. And has number 1 slowed too much and the revs have dropped and the car has stalled, or is it more of a problem? Or has that prompted the full course yellow? Didn't see the chronology of it, I'm afraid, but car number 1 has stopped out on track. That'll give ace race engineer Adam Hardy some worrying moments to try and work out why the car has come to a halt, but they'll be on the radio, no doubt, to the driver and try and see whether or not they can talk Robin Frins through a sort of start procedure. Does it need to be switched off, reset, restarted, and away it goes? Sometimes it works, but it could be something more sinister than that. So while that car is in an awkward place, instead of stopping the session, then a full course yellow is employed to try and move that out of the way. So the full course yellow means that people can keep circulating, but it allows the marshals to move a car out of harm's way without the need to stop a session, bring everybody into the pit lane. And therefore that does eat into the session, at least this way. You can keep circulating, and as soon as the incident is clear, and in fact the car's got hoiked out of the way now, look, the rope attached to the front, then so it's very easy to get the session underway again. You don't have to give people a minute-by-minute countdown and wait for everybody to be back in the pit lane. You can just keep them circulating, and then as soon as the problem is clear, withdraw the yellows, put out the green flags, and away you go. There's normally a 10 count, so that the teams can pass the info to the drivers as to when they need to be on their toes. A massively shredded tyre there. Just trying to work out which team that is, but the team in question looking very concerned that that tyre is shredded. And 34 it is. There it is. Bang, you can see in the replay. And that was the car that was quickest in the AM category, wasn't it? The Mercedes of Pierre Herret and Alexander Matschel. So that needs a new right rear. Next question, why did that happen? Is that something that has been run over, or is it a failure in the tyre? So I'm sure the Pirelli technicians will want to have a look at that. We are green, so the session is back live. Ignore the yellows. That's now been replaced by green flags trackside, so we are back and running. The pit lane starts to empty as people pour back out on track. Now a car that's a potential race winner, and never mind championship because it's scored badly at Spa, is 58, which is the Shane van Gisbergen, Rob Bell, Kevin Estre McLaren. And it's a shame that Spa turned out to be such a nightmare for the team, because that was at 6 they were there or thereabouts, but at 12 they weren't, and at 24 they definitely weren't there for points. So that had a big part to play in the fact that they're not really pitching for the championship, despite a strong showing at Monza, a win at Silverstone, and a good showing again at Paul Ricard. But in terms of a race win, then this could well be the car. Shane van Gisbergen adds yet another new circuit to his list. He's the man behind the wheel at the moment. Give the Giz as much track time as they can, really. get the Kiwi up to speed. It's a nice fit with the New Zealander behind the wheel of an orange McLaren, of course, the traditional McLaren colours carried by Bruce McLaren, himself a New Zealander, when he created the McLaren brand. In those days, a single-seater racing cars, and Van Gisbergen goes off the road, hops back on again. So this lap a lap away from him. Dave Ryan's team operating the two cars this weekend as ever. There is this one, and then there's the white one for Bruno Senna, Adrian Quaife-Hobbs and Alvaro Parent. And certainly in Parent's hands, that's going to be very, very quick indeed. So at the moment, it is Bentley, Audi, Lamborghini, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes within the top 6. A real spread of cars. And the Ferrari that's up there is the Matt Griffin Duncan Cameron car. Matt having done the time earlier in the Pro-Am category. The Emil Frey Jaguar just heading up towards us. Remember, it's podium finish at Silverstone in the class. In the background as well, the black and turquoise Nissan. That's the Walkinshaw Dolby Ploughman car, another one that's got a change of number for the weekend. It's gained a 1, it's changed livery, and it looks very, very different indeed. It's almost Vitaphone-esque, isn't it, in its colours? But it's another eye-catching car. They've had some bad luck this season in the Endurance Championship, but they don't lack much behind the wheel. So there's the Nissan. Not a car that's capable of winning the championship, but the equivalent car run by the Bob Neville RJN team is, which is the Alex Buncombe, Katsuma Tsuchiyo, Wolfgang Reip car. So that's another one to watch for. Always Evolving Motorsport is the new entrant rather than SWR. So looks different, entered different number, all changed, apart from the driving makeup of that car. Craig Dolby hustling it over the curb, getting the back end out of shape, corrects it, but proof of how hard he's trying there to stay with Shane Van Gisbergen. Totally different look, isn't it? You can get the two cars together like that, and it's fascinating to compare and contrast how the McLaren looks, the low-line McLaren, compared to the much bulkier-looking Nissan, but they've both been winning cars by way of a brand this year. Go back 3 years, it was at this section of the circuit that there was a rather large accident for the Peter Dumbret, Lucas Luhr Nissan in the final round of the championship, but Craig Dolby presses on. Now, how's his lap time looking here? Because what he wants to try to do is work the car up the order, but because he's stuck in traffic, the sector times aren't that flash. He's 29th in the standings, so there's not really a chance of an improvement come the end of this. 50 Ferrari over the timing line. Now, who else have we got that might be able to go quicker before the very end of all of this? We've got still 26.5 minutes still to go. I've got to say, actually, looking at the sectors that people are doing, nobody getting terribly concerned, it seems, about a qualifying run at the moment. They're all thinking rather more about setup and hoping that the track conditions for the race, never mind qualifying, are going to be comparable to this. It could well be that tomorrow is a wet old day, you never know. Now, Bentley number 7, fastest, that's pitted. Also in has Carmelo Bortolotti, 34th fastest over the timing line there, Felipe Fraga, after his earlier spin. He's gone by, turning his way to the Mercedes arena. And so Fraga presses on. One other message that's just been offered to the teams is that some appear to have radio problems and not hearing the race director, which puts them on the back foot straight away, because an awful lot of information is imparted through the radio network about flag signals, for example, about start procedure, about penalties, and so the race director concerned that not everybody has a functioning radio at the moment, but the team's rather more concerned on trying to make sure the cars are doing what they want them to do. Touched a while ago on the Rover Racing 98 Mercedes. The sister car, Steph Dusseldorf, at the wheel is 14th fastest. Sort of mired at the moment, but come the race, over the course of 3 hours, progress can be made. It's one of the beauties of this championship with such a big grid. So much happens across the course of a weekend, and you start to look at a grid, and the race result is normally completely different because people can make progress, can use the strategy to their advantage over the course of the race. Around here, it's not a circuit that's very thirsty on fuel, so that's not really going to be an issue. The drivers will try and do 70 minutes really to a stint, which is the maximum drive time, and that gives you 31 laps really in dry conditions. So depending on how you want to play that strategy with your slower driver, a pit window, certainly within the Pro Cup, would be around about the 20 to 35 lap mark. But what you might do, for example, is run your slower driver for the shorter amount of time, maximise the other two. But in the Pro Cup, there's not normally that much to choose between them. So 24 minutes still to run. Andy Merrick's Bentley still in the pit lane, and there's barely any improvement to be found in the sectors or the lap times now. So the session looking moderately calm, even though we've had one or two in dramas. 32, Aston, the team manager. This is Stuart Leonard's car being summoned to race control. It could be for infringements in the pit lane as much as any dramas on the circuit. 333, Norbert Siedler at the wheel of the Rinaldi Racing Ferrari, heading up towards the line. 32nd this car is. Norbert Siedler is another man, the Austrian, who knows his way around here very well. There is Renat Salikov on the driving force, but also they brought in Robert Renauer, which should be interesting because Robert Renauer has been very quick in Carrera Cup Deutschland for many, many years now. In fact, has also tried his hand at GT racing in the German Championship, and Robert Renauer, having failed really to crack Carrera Cup Deutschland, has decided to switch to GT racing. Norbert Siedler using lots and lots of curb on the inside there as he dives through the Mercedes arena. Marco Seefried has driven the car, of course, in the sprint races this year and also at Spa, but Norbert Siedler, very, very rapid indeed. 333 is 33rd at the moment. So if you look on the door, you look on the Lumirank on the windscreen, there's a proliferation of digit threes, but Norbert Siedler, at the end of the previous lap, did a personal best in the last sector, and he's just done a personal best in the long first sector of this lap. So this is looking all right for him. A lap around here is really just under 2 minutes, give or take. And so Norbert Siedler, personal best in the first sector, should be on for an improvement here because there aren't that many cars around him. So Siedler presses on. He comes over the brow up towards the next to the S's into the Bilstein curve in a moment. We've got the Kelders Porsche a bit further up the road, but largely Norbert Siedler has escaped the traffic on this lap. He's coming up towards the end of the second sector. And when he gets to the timing beam now, he's a little bit down, in fact, by about 7/10 on the absolute best, set by Stephen Kane. And now the traffic gets in the way for the last corner, so it should be an improvement from Norbert Siedler, but by how much is the question as he heads up towards the timing line now. Car number 1, incidentally, has rejoined the session after its problems. Norbert Siedler, can you believe it, after all of that, went quicker, but stays 33rd. So the car that was second on the road, won its class at Monza, only 33rd at the moment. Number 99 is the Stef Dusseldorp Mercedes. You're riding with the Dutch driver at the moment as he works his way through the Mercedes arena appropriately because he's in one of the many SLS AMG GT3s. Great study this of the driver hard at work. That's the car from the outside, and the Rover Racing team, as in a sense its home venue, working out of the Mercedes arena now. The car 15th fastest, and although they've not been race winners, we haven't had a Mercedes victory this year, a championship is a real possibility. So Stef Dusseldorp, Nico Bastien and Danny Juncker-Deyer go into this as the driving combination. Now, Juncker-Deyer, therefore, puts himself out of contention because he's driven the year in another Mercedes that is on different points, but the DTM racer is certainly going to be capable, I would have thought, of taking the battle to anybody out there. Very, very fast driver he is indeed. Stef Dusseldorp sawing away at the wheel. Look at that. Lots of opposite lock and correction being needed there. Stef Dusseldorp, we know he's no slouch in a GT car from his experience of not just Mercedes, but McLaren's. Race winner in Blancpain in a McLaren going back to the old MP4 12C days. And Danny Junqueira, as I say, a real hot shoe in the DTM, but a star going back 3 or 4 seasons in the Formula 3 Euro Series, one of the few overtakers in that category, and always a spirited driver. Now, somebody else that all of a sudden has got all excited is 66 Dominic Schwager, because he's up to 2nd fastest. He has just done 2 personal bests and an absolute best to go 2nd quickest. Number 66 Dominic Schwager, who in a sense is going to be wasted a bit really, because it is him and Stephen Parov in the Ferrari that Pierre Caffa drove with him at the start of the year, and the lion's share of the driving has to be done by the bronze driver, the lower graded driver, Stephen Parov. But Dominic Schwager, when he's behind the wheel, as he's just illustrated, will be very, very quick indeed. Over the timing line, through the traffic comes Steph Dusseldorp, and that lap is not an improvement, but again the back marker's got in the way. We've got 20 minutes to go, just under, and lots and lots and lots of people now pouring down the pit lane. '84 Vincent Abril, category winner in the Sprint Series last year when he was an Audi driver, switching now to Bentley for this year. And there's the HTP car, easily distinctive because of the different colour schemes in which they run compared to the works cars. And Vincent Abril then making his way in the car that he shares with Mike Parisi and Harold Primat, who is going to call time on his racing career this weekend after many, many years of single-seater and sports car racing. Harold Primat has decided it's time to go. Done many, many miles as Harold Primat. Vincent Abril heads downhill into the Dunlop curve, 40th fastest. But again, how much you read into a session like this when they're on old tyres, and some might be going for a dummy qualifying run, some doing a race run, some looking at setup. It's very hard to know, but Abril trying to maximise the track time that's available to him. New to the Endurance Series this year, having raced in the Sprint Series last season. With class success, it must be said. Won the Silver Cup last year, but a former Seat racer. He's racing the French GT Championship, but limited Nurburgring experience. Really busy road there, look, coming up towards the motorbike chicane, in the midst of which is the TF Sport Aston Martin. Flashing his lights is Vincent Abril, so he is trying to go for a quick time, but the 2 sets as he's done are down compared to what he wants to be doing, so trying hard, undoubtedly, running it up onto the curb there, but it's not really happening for him. The gun time is by the works Bentley. Over the timing line comes Vincent Abril. That's a 59.9, so quite a lot of time lost in relation to the equivalent number 7 car. So Abril in traffic once more, working his way up through the Mercedes arena, and in fact ahead of him significantly number 10 being driven by Jean-Luc Bobelic, and I say significantly because that means it's made it into the session, having been missing the bulk of it, and it also now means that we've got all 55 cars present in this session. So 55 is the magic number for the weekend. I know a lot of people get a bit hung up on how many cars there are. 55 is a very good number to have. It means that the pit lane is busy without being too dangerous. It also means that it's going to be very, very busy on track, but without being absolutely crammed full. So finding a clear bit of track space for qualifying is going to be crucial. But over the course of 3 hours, 55 cars is not too bad a number at all. It's going to be another good race. And of course, that's with 3 very strong classes. In fact, the smaller entry I think you'll find this weekend is in the AM category, perversely. The Pro Cup this year really has taken off with a real storm. So this weekend we've got 22 in the Pro Cup alone. The Attempto Porsche through, and how many more cars are about to improve times before the end. Devon Modell has gone quicker for a Curiacos. He's done a 1:57.312 in the Pro-Am blue and white BMW for 15th, so he's moved himself up to 15th overall now. But Bentley number 7 remains the fastest, and also for the moment remains in the pit lane. So an improvement not forthcoming there. Now around here, the grunt of the Mercedes I think is going to be important. You've seen already how 21 has been going in the hands of Abdulaziz Al Faisal. It was up in the top 4 at one stage. We've seen Steph Dusseldorp getting on with the job, and here also, look, going strongly now is 21, which has been taken over by Hubert Haupt, the vastly experienced German racer. And 14 more minutes of this session remain. That doesn't affect the grid. It is purely, as its name says, free practice, for which, although it is timed, it doesn't have a bearing on any grid position or for the rest of the weekend. Pre-qualifying, though, this afternoon at the end of the day could be very significant indeed, because if the weather forecast is, as it suggests, going to be quite wet tomorrow morning, and that might in turn bring some fog, if the circuit conditions were not safe, visibility too poor, and the session couldn't run, then the times will be taken from pre-qualifying. Now, if you can run an element of qualifying, you know it's 3 parts. If you could run Q2 and Q3 but not Q1, then okay, you can take those times. But if you can't run it at all, then the grid would be based on pre-qualifying. And so at the end of the day, what is normally a session of reasonable importance could become very important, and it would be no surprise if people didn't have a dummy qualifying effort right at the very end. That's the Dominic Schwager Ferrari that we talked about a while ago. He's now given it over to Stephen Parov, his co-driver, and 66 then heads downhill. The Black Pearl racing car looking almost anonymous, but it's done a good job this year in the Pro-Am category. And Dominic Schwager, back from many years racing in Japan and earning quite a good living for doing it as well, will be one to watch, I think, when he gets behind the wheel. If he does the first stint, then it could well be up the order, sort of Marco Seefried, Norbert Siedler style. Now we have got people going on in the pit lane to a new set of tyres, perhaps to scrub those in anticipation of pre-qualifying. And with 12 minutes on the clock, Stephen Parov heads uphill. Guy Smith has taken over Bentley number 7. That's been sent out of the pit lane. And all 55 cars now accounted for. The team manager of the quickest Bentley also being summoned to see the race director. And there's another TF Sport, Tom Ferrier's team. Yes, that team also has done something to attract attention from the race officials as well. So out of the Mercedes arena goes Stephen Parov, and as he heads downhill, you can see how busy the road is becoming once again. More and more people now heading back out on track, and as they do so, a very jumbled order to the times, but it's when we get to the qualifying session and or the times based on pre-qualifying that will have the greater importance, of course. 11 more minutes on the clock, which is about 5 laps really. Stephen Parov comes down through the Dunlop curve, climbs uphill. But with hardly anybody around him at the moment, he should be able to wring something pretty decent out of this, I would have thought. Making his way then now towards the Bilstein curve. Lots of runoff there, should you need it, but largely people can get through there without too many dramas. Speed builds, plunge downhill. Through the Ad Van Bogen, and then up towards the NGK chicane, the softer version, the motorcycle version of it being used, which doesn't have quite the stop-start pinch point to it. It's easier on the transmission. It's also easier to negotiate as well, and fewer incidents. So in a series where you have got bronze drivers, there's no real requirement to make life even more difficult for them. Hence that version of the chicane is used. 22 Nissan just going through ahead of the Gabriele Gardel Jaguar, the Emil Frey team car. There's the Acuria Cost BMW that Devon Modell was doing good things with earlier on. 15th fastest it is. And behind, look, 173 Nissan is now Sean Walkinshaw at the wheel. 22 Nissan there. Gains this weekend, Harry Tinknell. He is behind the wheel of it. From what I'm pretty sure is his first, certainly Blancpain race, but GT race in anything. He's one of the stars of the LMP2 class in the European Le Mans Series. Harry Tinknell, former Formula 3 race winner. And sideways coming out of the chicane. The car running in its retro 1990s livery. That was Bob Neville's idea to run the car in that colour scheme at Spa, and it really has been a big hit with the fans, so they've kept the colour scheme over the timing line it comes. Now this is the Pro-Am Cup car, so it's an interesting mix of drivers in that. Harry Tinknell for the weekend joining the regulars, Guy Sampalato and Ricardo Sanchez, both PlayStation GT Academy winners. But Harry Tinknell adapting now to a very bright future, I think, in sports car racing. 56 Ferrari goes through, which is the Jürgen Hering, Dimitris Constantino, Frank Schmickler car. Frank Schmickler is another driver Hugh had experienced. And this was a car that Dimitris Constantino drew attention to for the wrong reasons, really, at Monza, but has gone better and better since then as he's gained experience. He's been a regular in the ADAC GT Championship. He's done FIA GT3 going back a few years. He's raced in Dubai 24 Hours and the 24-hour series events, so somebody who certainly understands long-distance racing. And Frank Schmickler goes back to the mid-80s in Formula 3 and then onto the DTM, so he doesn't want for much behind the wheel in terms of experience either. It's good to have the Porsche in the AM category. Not enough Porsches on the grid, but now that the brand has conquered Le Mans with a hybrid car, prototype car, maybe more effort's going to be put into the GT field, and see whether the current 991 that runs as a cup car in one make championships will be enhanced into a GT3 race winner. There'll be a huge amount, I think, of support for that if it happened. Porsche kind of comes and goes with its GT program. It's very concerned about one make categories, particularly with Carrera Cup looking so strong and the Porsche Super Cup looking strong as well, supporting Grand Prix. But the GT program ebbs and flows a little bit. Some seasons a lot of weights thrown behind it, other seasons not so. On this lap, Frank Schmickler getting caught up in traffic, and he's got one of the two Santa Lock Audis to try to wriggle a way through there, which he does, heading up towards the chicane. Gets past 36, which is the so-called Santa Lock Junior team car that's 54th fastest, with Gregoire de Moustier at the wheel. Now, he is a kind of junior, but one or two of the drivers he's with are much more experienced, Mark Rostam being one of them, for example. It's a Pro-Am class car. Porsche through. And Frank Schmickler heads into the Mercedes arena, 47th fastest now that car is. The Blancpain Endurance Series this weekend, part of a very busy programme on track, with Formula Renault 2-litre NEC being part of the programme, as well as the Blancpain Bat Lamborghini Super Trofeo and also the Seat Leon Euro Cup. So lots and lots of action for the fans as part of this iRacing.com GT500 weekend. Now there, 71 Mercedes with Alexei Vasiliev at the wheel of it, powering uphill. This is another of the cars that comes from Pro-Am. The GT Russian team is the entrant, and Alexei Vasiliev, Karim Al-Azari and Marco Asma the drivers. Vasiliev, whose GT career goes back well over a decade to when he was a regular in the FIA GT Championship. So 4 more minutes of the session still to go, and it is the Bentley number 7 which perhaps starts its weekend in the best possible fashion here by being the quickest, because it's a team, Guy Smith, Andy Merrick, Stephen Kane, fighting to try to win the Pro Cup in the championship, and quickest, albeit by only 0.149 of a second. 31st is where you find Vincent Abril with the HTP Bentley here, look, coming through the motorbike chicane up towards the timing line. So the car down towards the exit of the Mercedes arena. This is 84 Bentley. And just 3 more minutes of this free practice session still to run. One Audi back on track after its stop earlier that brought out a full course yellow. Laurens Vanthoor is behind the wheel of that car, and off in a big way has gone the McLaren that did have Shane van Gisbergen at the wheel of it, and Rob Bell is the man behind the wheel now, and that is very, very unlike Rob Bell, who got it wrong seemingly on his own, spins onto the grass and into the barrier, but it makes you wonder whether, although we saw the sort of second half of the incident, somebody else was involved, either to put him off his stride or even make contact. But Rob Bell off the road, that's going to be a yellow, and could even be an early red flag, an early checkered flag to the session. But that's a big impact and quite a bit of damage, and you don't often see Rob Bell with the damaged car. I've got to say, yes, a red flag. So the session's at an end, because by the time that's been retrieved, there'll be no time to restart it. But Rob Bell off, damage to the McLaren. And so the session is stopped, and although it's not doing so on the screen, the clock does continue to tick away. The session will not restart, so what we have is based on the earlier times, but I'm afraid to say that's a McLaren with quite a bit of damage, and it means that the team Von Rahn Racing will have a lot of work to do. Rob Bell, as I say, he's not somebody that often does that. So, a damaged McLaren, but a very fast Bentley. Guy Smith is quickest at the end of that session. Number 7 Bentley ahead of the Stephen Parov and Dominic Schwager Ferrari, with Marco Bononomi's Audi being third fastest. Marcus Winkelhock dragged the number 6 Audi that we'd seen Marchi Lee driving up to 4th by the end, ahead of the number 63 Grasser Racing Team Lamborghini. This is how the top 12 looks, and you can see the spread of times. Very, very competitive within that leading gaggle. Dominic Schwager having his Blancpain debut and making a very good account of himself, getting right up there with Stephen Kane, who did the gun time. Other good efforts as ever, Matt Griffin, also Stefan Mucker for 7th, and the Mercedes number 21 looking like a dark horse as well. Keep scrolling through 55 cars, and there are quite a few that you might anticipate to be quicker, but with such a competitive field, getting everybody up into the leading positions is not an easy task, and so something has to give. Inevitably, there are 1 or 2 drivers that find themselves further down the order than you might normally anticipate. scroll further through. 333 Ferrari, one that's certainly further back than I anticipated it to be. And 30th, now with its damage, number 58 McLaren off the road. And that's what's brought out this red flag and an early stoppage to the session. So a long way back also, number 3 Audi, just to make the point that although it's entered by the Belgian Audi club, it's a Sébastien Loeb racing car. David Hallyday, Lonnie Martins and Christophe Amon, the drivers. And slowest after its problems at the start of the day, the number 10 Ferrari that did make it out and did a limited number of laps, but did at least get into the time. So, free practice done. For some, a big repair job with that McLaren with damage. But pre-qualifying to come at the end of the day.